Right. Gonna start admitting folks. Welcome, everyone, to the annual takeover of RNDP. I just want to send greetings and salutations to my comrades in Impedum who are preparing for their convention this weekend. September 20th and 21st in St. Louis, Missouri. If you have not registered already, there is still time. You can go on to their website and get linked to the Eventbrite that has the registration information. I believe that there's going to be Comrade Matsamela is here, so I'll let him continue to talk about it, and then we can get into the PE. Matsamela.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
The so it's a 2-day convention, September 20th and 21st. You can register at impedum.org right there on the homepage, or you can go to impedum2025.eventbrite.com. Important political conversations, elections, important resolutions, and things that will dictate the future of impedum for the coming years.
Ooh, thank you, comrade. Appreciate you. Um, he's in the airport trying to get to the Impedum convention. Um, So, once again, this is the annual takeover RNDP, or just collaboration, not takeover, but collaboration with the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. This is our Harriet Goddard live study. Um, and today we're going to talk about charity versus self-determination, the rise of the NGO and naming of helping women and children. There wasn't a PE associated with this that I would have shared before this meeting, but I have a link to an article that we will read just as a piece that will, encourage some conversations and maybe some thoughts. I think one of the biggest things is that when I came into the movement, I started with the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, and my comrade Aisha, Director Aisha Fields, who is the director of that organization, um, would have come on with me this evening. However, she had a conflict that was unavoidable. So, but I started in the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, thinking of and analyzing charity as a model in the African world, and how it is that there are so many NGOs, particularly in the African world, throughout the continent of Africa, so many on the small half island where Haiti is, and how none of these organizations provide any solutions or help really deal with the contradiction that we're experiencing. It's not that we don't have water or trees or institutions and people who are organizing themselves for a better place. This is just that we don't have power, we don't have control over the things that can improve our lives. And NGOs um, position themselves to be a mediator between their funders and donors and the people. And it actually undermines the self-determination that already is existing in these places in the African world, in Africa and the Haiti and Caribbean, Latin and Central America, and places where you would imagine that these sort of institutions would exist so that they can show that they're helping these poor and oppressed people. So we're going to talk about it today, and we are going to dig in. And I very much would appreciate it, like if you have your input, your thoughts, opinions about this issue, that you jump in, or maybe you haven't thought about it at all, right? Like maybe it's like I've never thought about NGOism or nonprofitism and how that impacts our view of, I think, the view of, I guess, charity, colonialism, um, imperialism, because all of these institutions operate not to destroy the pedestal that um, that they sit on, but they're there to take advantage of the situations that come as a result of these our people being colonized. And it's a money, I'm gonna give y'all one example. I wish I would have put it in the slides, which I'll bring up in a minute, but I'm old enough to have, and maybe they still exist, but TV is not TV anymore. You stream things, so you avoid these kind of commercials. But like when I was younger, and you got what you got on TV, there used to be these organizations that would scream, African babies with their belly inflated, and mothers who were, looking so despotic, and bugs in their eyes, not having enough to eat. So they were running from one crisis to something else in some encampment. And the reality is that that still exists, you know, and that charity that said that they was going to help this child, you know, might have helped the child, get out of that particular situation, gave them a bag of rice and, food for the day, but the situation and the conditions that they were running from are still is still there. So we'll explore that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get into the. I did a lot of talking already, so we might skip through a lot of stuff. But so yeah, I did a little overview. After African National Women's Organization is an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, revolutionary African internationalist, mouthful, organization for African women who organize around the pressing local and national issues that add to the special oppression of African women and femmes. Um, the reason why we designate so many different things that we are is because it's really important for people to be very clear about the kind of analysis they're going to get from us, which really sets us apart from other women organizations, radical or not. And it's really important I think that really sets us apart in a very wide landscape of women organizing, so that you really understand that we just, this is our line. We about revolution. We want to change the world and transform the world, not about continuing the same kinds of conversations that you might engage with other folks. So yeah, that's really important to us. As always, we do call for donations. We are a self-determined, self-sufficient organization. We are not a nonprofit. The resources that we get to do our work comes from our membership and from donors like yourself. So whatever you can to do to support the African National Women's Organization, our programs, our events, our webinars, things like that, the $100 for this program will really be helpful. Things like Restream and Zoom, they cost us a little change. So that will be really helpful if you can. And you can just go on to annualuhuru.org/donate and become a one-time donor or a sustaining donor. Or if that doesn't work for you, you can go to Zelle and you can just send us money via Zelle at info@annualuhuru.org, and that comes directly to us. So if you can do it now or throughout the program, or after, it'll be really appreciated. Thank you so much. Other ways that you can support the African National Women's Organization is to shop AMWO. We have products that we've created for you to wear. Some swag, some RBG swag, some anti-imperialist swag, some Black women swag, some anti-colonial, other people's swag. You got it on the website. And just go to annualuhuru.org/storefront. That t-shirt is $25, a little fanny pack, which is tough. It has a lot of change in there. Sometimes when I do my vending, it's a very sturdy bag. It is $35. And I always get compliments on it. And then we have things like the cup, the mug that I have on my desk, and that's Comrade Coco with the mug, $15. That's a tall mug. We have a shorter mug and a tall mug, and the tall mug is $15, and it says Black power for Black people who consider revolution because colonialism is just too much. And that's run the gamut. And then we should consider making another cup, like for people who consider revolution because colonialism is just too much, and still be Black power because you're down with the liberation of African people. So that's dope too. And then we also say see African internationalism. So we want to point you in that direction. Also, the comrade cap is really great to keep my head warm, especially in these coming days when the cold is going to hit us. So I need a nice little scully. I think I'll roll it up this time. And then we also have our brand, economic development brand, Decolonize. Um, yeah, we're about to be at if you're in Philly or close thereabouts, we're gonna have a table there this weekend. We are also sold online. In October, we'll be in St. Louis with a table and in other places as well. If you follow the Colonnades, if you're on our newsletter, you'll find out more about that. But you can shop our products, which are handmade mostly by me, and celebrate, African women creating and organizing and using whatever means that we have at our disposal to create economic development for our organizing and for our people. So go to decolonize.com and get you something. Yeah. So I talked a lot already about NGOsm, but I wrote a little something here that we can read through. Um, and just some points. I would, if you want to write down like the points that you want to come back to, definitely do that because there'll be a time where we can, well, throughout this whole entire time, we'll have time to like, have feedback and talk and bounce off ideas from one another. But for those who don't know what NGOism is non-governmental organization. These are usually nonprofits that operate primarily outside of their home country. And they are sometimes identified as NGOs who are native to their home country. So, what would be a nonprofit here in the United States would I'd be identified as an NGO if it came out of, say, Kenya, for example. But mostly, what we're talking about is the externalization of nonprofit work from usually a center of imperialism, to a place, to the colonies, right? To the colonies in Africa, the Caribbean, and so on and so forth. So just want to make that distinction. So when we look at how NGOs show up in those places, they replace so they go there because let's give an example, right? And you could throw some in the chat too. I might not hit all of them, but there's so many NGOs for so many different reasons, right? So we're talking about women though, but which is always like the driving force for us. Like I'm gonna say there is war in the Sudan and conflict in the Congo and things like that. And there are organizations that fund even native women's work, right? But even in looking at the position of these NGOs is always about providing a safe place for African women or providing them with opportunities for economic development or whatever it is, like, or providing housing because African girls are not going to school, and so we need to find housing for them so that they can go to school to get their education because the society does not place a value on girls' education. So all of these things seem very good, right? We want African people to have food. We want African people to have housing. We want African women particularly to be protected from violence and all of these things. But these NGOs are not positioned to help African people with their self-determination. They have a um, a goal which is funded by their funders. So if the goal is okay, we're donating $1 million, and we need to see that you've created housing for X, Y, and Z people in this place, and that's how we know we can like give the statistics. So they go ahead and create housing that nobody might need. Like there might be housing, native or indigenous housing, but housing that nobody needs. And they'll put somebody in there, they'll hire somebody from the population, and that person is paid by some off center uh um they're hired by some distant, organization somewhere. So they're funded through another process. So NGOs replace justice with charity. offering aid that manages our suffering but never addresses the colonial theft that created. In the name of feminism and empowerment, donor-driven NGOs define African women's struggle in ways that depoliticize and contain us. So why, it's very simple. African women are fighting the men that's oppressing us in this particular country without really engaging in a deeper discussion about the ongoing and historical decades, centuries, sometimes long conflict that are spurred on by colonialism, which is a deeper conversation that they don't want to get into. It's easier just to say violence, violence, violence. African women need to be protected. But in every single decade, as far as I've been alive, African women have never been protected by any NGO or any government, not even their own, right? Like so we can just already just like throw that out of the window. And this keeps us in a cycle of dependency instead of self-determination, where African-led groups are trapped in foreign agendas, right? Our task is to break that cycle by building our own institutions that answer to African women, not to donors, and fight for justice, not charity. And no NGO or IO, international organization, is organized to call for the overthrow of colonial and neo-colonial systems that create African women's oppression in the first place. None of them will do it. They might have critique over the way the corruptness in the society if they go there. But fundamentally, the reason that they exist is because of that corruptness, because of the theft, because of the parasitism. That NGO is getting hundreds of millions of dollars to showcase that desperateness conditions of African people. So their role is to manage crisis with the existing global order and not to dismantle it. This is why so many women's programs center on resilience, coping, or empowerment in narrow terms rather than liberation. So even in their most well-resourced projects, NGOs cannot and will not challenge the political economy of colonialism, which extracts African women's labor and subordinates our lives to imperialism. So thus, while NGOs and IOs may provide temporary relief, the evidence shows they do not fundamentally alter African women's conditions. And in fact, by keeping the focus on aid rather than systemic transformation, they can entrench the very structures they claim to address. You often might see them connecting and working with governments to kind of improve those conditions, but we know that the whole thing is rotten to its core. And the very design of most NGOs and IO programs is rooted in donor priorities, not the self-determined agendas of African women ourselves. The proof that exists is often donor-producing reporting, focused on outputs, numbers of women reached, workshops held, supplies delivered, rather than structural change in women's power, economic position, or political control. So yeah, I remember we were reading in the AMWO in one of our meetings, we had an article that came up as a form of like political education. One of our comrades brought it up and she was just like, yeah, I think it's great. Like I think it's great that, these efforts it was like something about like the UN is doing something, some initiative for women and things like that. And it looks on the surface so great, right? Like these initiative for women because it's going to solve our problem. And to the untrained eye, to the person who does not involve themselves in political analysis, it's like, oh, that somebody can just read that and take it for face value. You don't have to do anything else. And you just know that the situation is going to be resolved because there are these agencies and there's these governments and these organizations that are focused on women's empowerment, and the thing is going to get solved some way or somehow because there are things in motion on the surface. But when you scratch the surface a little bit, right, just a little bit, you can start to break down and rip to shreds, really, the fundamentals of this thing. If they're talking about a place and you're a historian, if you're not a historian, if you've been alive long enough, you can say that this has been an ongoing issue. And if this thing is going to solve this issue, then how has it solved this issue in all of this time that this issue has been in existence? And the answer is nothing. You can't do that. And I also want to say that some NGOs, right, have budgets bigger than some small countries. You know what I mean? Like some of them have hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on, like, let's talk about what's that environmental and like nonprofit Greenpeace. Man, you know how much money they make? You know how much money, because they do crazy stuff. They have a Greenpeace ship that sails out on the ocean, right? Like they have airplanes, you know what I mean? Like they can organize, they have the money to fund anything and shift whatever. And they have crazy people too who go out and do like these really bold actions out there to save the animals or to save the oceans or to save plastic from being in the ocean, things like that. And their budgets are so crazy, right? Like, but if donors really cared about the conditions of the people or the oceans or the animals, maybe you should really invest in the people who are actually doing the work to solve those problems. But part of that also comes in like with the distrust of those people, because the people are usually brown people. Oh no, we can't give them the money because they're not going to use it right, or they don't have no management, or they need some control, some management by the outer liar nonprofit. That's why you see that some of these indigenous nonprofits or NGOs are governed by or funded by, an external NGO. So it might be some great women in Kenya who's doing work to replant trees because they care about the environment, but they're partnered with an NGO that's going to make sure that they fund money, who's also an environmental government. And then the NGO in that place will say, oh, yeah, look at the work that we're doing to support these amazing African women and supporting self-determination. And the thing is that when that dries up, they can't support self-determination. And the reality is that we should be fighting for a government, a society where that is natural and intrinsic, not as some sort of pet project of African women who were just tired of not seeing trees, but the fact that it should be woven into society itself. And how do you fight for that as an NGO? You don't. You just you if you cap the money to give seeds and organize people to give seeds, and that's the thing that you do. You don't fight to overturn a contradiction. You fight to pressure donors. You fight to, give examples of how you help these poor people. Um, but you don't fight to overturn a contradiction. So I've talked a lot, and I wanted to see, if anybody had any thoughts of your own before we jump into the article that I wrote that I shared earlier in the chat. And yeah, that's going to be very interesting. Uhudu. And if you don't, it's fine. I'm cool with that. Go ahead, Coco.
I was gonna say so.
Yeah, it's
Bring
cool.
conversation. I mean, I put the Red Cross in the chat over here because I was it was a social media um like a reel about the Red Cross, and I said never give the money to your Red Cross, because by the time it goes through all the executives and the staff and the facilities and everything else, there's very little even left of your donation actually going to the people in the first place. And we saw that during the Haiti earthquake situation, where is Red Cross raised millions and millions of dollars. End up, they had these big fancy webinars and had, uh, celebrities, and they pay these celebrities. Most of these celebrities are not showing up for free. They're being paid to come there.
Yep.
Then they pay their staff, and they have to pay the executives. Then they have to, the money that they raise, very little of it goes actually to the people. And I realized it's working for a nonprofit, like, and it was a smaller scale, and the court, and it's like, the people that works for these organizations have really good intentions, but is the system, is how it's set up. It's set up to not really uh, help the people for real. And then on top of that, like what I wanted to say, on top of that, with when I compare these, I've been, looking at, nonprofits versus grassroots organizations like AMWO, because we do this as a volunteer. Every one of our members who are out here working, we do this because we really want to be free. The thing about, this goes back to a conversation we had in like the market meeting. Like, you get these NGOs and these nonprofits who pretty much pull talent away from grassroots, because
Yeah.
grassroots, we can't afford to pay you 80 or 100K salary.
Mm-hmm.
We are all in here volunteer. So, people, we all have to, make a living. So it's really easy for people to build skills in grassroots organizations like Anwar Nahuru movement, and then get lured away by a nonprofit or NGO. So you're taking those skills out of the grassroots and going into these nonprofits, NGOs, which you just be a just another pawn in the system.
Yeah.
Huru.
That's a great point too, because I work for a nonprofit. That's my wage job. The lesser of all the evils, right? Like, like if I get paid, but I'm there as a worker, not as an organizer. And I do all of my organizing with the African National Women's Organization. And I think that's really important point to say, that some people who want to do stuff, but they want to be paid some money, they go to the NGOs, which is also like they're okay with like trading their labor for some sort of change, but not, and that's sufficient for their soul. Right? That's sufficient for their soul, but beyond that, there's not much that they're doing in the world of organizing. And I think that's real, like that we have to look at ourselves. I'm not going to knock nobody hustle. I mean, if you find a nonprofit or whatever that you need to work with, I guess it's better than working for the government, you know what I mean? But I think that we all need to really understand that these sort of solutions are not solutions at all, that they are a part of the crisis and a response to a crisis that, if the organization is around long enough, then you recognize that the crisis is always going to have ebbs and flows depending on who's in government or who's in office and things like that. So then what do we do, right? If we want to help solve a problem, what do? We have to organize ourselves, or we support grassroots organizations and, you know, get to where they need to be. But I think particularly you need to like really focus in on, like, who is really about transforming the world, not reforming the world. Right? Like, who is really like digging in deep and was just like, we got the message, we got the process, we want to change this whole thing. And then if you agree with that, then you can help achieve that strategy through financial donations or your actual activity in that organization. Anybody else want to say anything about NGOs or nonprofits, and how it you can say how, whatever, but like, this topic is about like really assessing, how it doesn't really solve long-term issues for African people, and that what we do ourselves help to solve those problems. Matamela?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so kind of going off of what y'all were just saying, one thing that I think it also has done, one effect is that NGOs internationally, but also nonprofits, the way through which they've come to equate their work with activism, it's also really, I've noticed, and we got to think about, change the culture of like people involved in grassroots activism.
Mm.
Because there's like, you know, I mean, when I got involved in education, it was always when we was coming up and we knew that we wanted to be doing stuff, it was always like, okay, what sort of work can we do to like mitigate the fact that we don't want to be bothered. We want to, it's of course like teaching isn't the revolution, but it's not managing a hedge fund on Wall Street. But it'll also free me up to do the work that has to be done, right? So if I'm committing myself to a life of work, but we know that, but no one is. expecting, and eventually we know we're struggling for the ability to have, our organizations to be self-sufficient and things like that. But I didn't get into it thinking like this is going to pay me. But I'm increasingly running into sort of like, people like, well, can you believe they had me trying to work for free type deal? You know what I mean? So it's like organizations, because other people have been able, and even less of the end, like there's a whole wing of nonprofitism where, like, they'll take pictures, everyone will post with berets on and their fists up and stuff like that. So aesthetically, it'll look like what we're doing. But then, they're backed by $50 million grant or something like that. And some of those contradictions don't really reveal themselves until they're backing out of events that, you thought that they were, committed to, and they're privately telling you, well, we got some concerns about this, or and things like that, right? Because I've seen it, right? And my concern that I'm looking at in the end is just the way in which, it even changes the recruitment process of everyday people into the work. Because, if you can't compete with the local nonprofit here in the US or an NGO internationally that's putting ducats in people's pockets, then it's a whole new young class of no new whole new class of people that are like, well, I can't do work here. And the other part is the other work that they do is like work, right? So they are doing, I don't know, 40, 50 hours a week worth of community work. But like, you know what I mean? So it's there's even a different way to which, like, if you were working a hedge fund and you wanted to be committed to the community, like, that the hedge fund isn't working the community, right? But like because you're fresh out of school and they've given you 65 grand to do work in the community, that's just enough. I don't know if I'm saying so much, but and there's so many things layered in there. I think, especially the shifting sort of economy, and things like that. New even degrees that promise people. I think like the old school social work train, that's not dead anymore, but it's been replaced with like leadership programs and nonprofit community developments and a master's in public policy and things like that that'll help you grant write and all this other stuff. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I've noticed and not to go after anybody, but I just noticed that's a contradiction that has really emerged as well with this aspect of funding. It's sort of, people's willingness to do so.
It's not a contradiction that's created by the individual, though. It's a contradiction that colonialism created, right? Like the reason why.
No, not at all.
Yeah. I know. I just wanted to clarify, like, too, like we're talking about individuals and the choices that we make, but we also recognize that the contradiction of the crisis that an organization might be responding to, an issue that the organization might be responding to, was primarily, the issue that was created by colonialism. So then how then, I want ammo to be obsolete. I want ABDA to be obsolete. I don't want us to be an organization that's around 100 years from now, for real. Like I don't. I'm like, so we are trying to make ourselves irrelevant because society would have transformed so much that an organization that's focused on African women and ending the colonial oppression is no longer needed because colonial oppression is a thing of the past. We are now in an equitable society that provides for everybody and has the things that everybody needs. So, the goal of an organization that really is about transforming the world is like we need to sunset at some point. Like we ain't doing this for like 100 years. We're not doing this for 50 years. Like we trying to get out of this. And so how then are we helping to push that agenda and narrative around, getting ourselves to be irrelevant? Our mission is to be irrelevant. Right. And in the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, the way that we do that is by contributing to the conversations and actions around destroying the pedestal parasitic capitalism and overturning our relationship with colonialism so that we can be free and independent people that can use our own resources to the benefit of ourselves. And then, whatever we got left for everybody else is cool too. You know what I'm saying? But like first and foremost, we got a lot of problems to solve in the African world, but we do have the resources to solve all of those problems. It's just that those resources are not in our hands and in our control, and in the hands that they are in, neo-colonial dictatorship and spell out coolness. You know what I mean? Like they're not really, they're working for this white power and blackface. So like they're working for the oppressor. So we're gonna jump into the article, and it's a piece I wrote. My beloved Viola Davis, and I wrote this before the final committee was actually secured. I went back and looked, and she never joined the advisory council. But I was appalled. I was like, "That's not my beautiful Viola," because I love this woman, right? So, but the U.S. recruits Viola Davis, and this is the Biden-Kamala administration. U.S. recruits Viola Davis, others for White Power and Blackface Advisory Council. And this touches on a bunch of things, but we're going to read through it. And do I have any volunteers to help read through it? I asked in the chat, but nobody didn't respond. So I'm hoping I just ask you verbally, see anybody want to take a shot. Okay. All right. You love hearing me speak. Okay. The Biden-Harris U.S. presidential administration announced the inaugural members of the Advisory Council on African Diaspora Engagement in the United States. The group of 12 members, I see you, Coco. I'm going to read a little bit and I'll let you take over. The group of 12 members notably included actress Viola Davis, who most recently recognized for her role in the movie Woman King, WNBA All-Star Chinenye Ogwumike, African Diaspora Network founder Almaz Negash, and among the rest of the bunch who are venture capitalists, clergy, bankers, and corporate figureheads. According to the White House press, first I'm going to stop there because this sounds like an impressive list of people. I'm like, oh yes, the Biden-Harris administration is pulling together Africans because they care about Africa and they care about the relationships that they're building with African people in this committee. Hold that thought. I know y'all not thinking this, but hold the thought, right? So according to the White House press release, Kamala Harris announced the plan to form this council at the 2022 U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, which excluded Burkina Faso, Eritrea, Mali, Sudan, and Guinea, countries who were also suspended from the African Union for their non-alignment with U.S. policy. Oh, I guess they cut it off. The 2022 U.S. Africa Leaders Summit was an attempt to salvage the waning influence of U.S. in Africa by offering neocolonial African heads of state a direct line to U.S. imperialist resources. Since the summit, the U.S. has waged a serious campaign to concretize U.S. influence on Africa policy by sending various leaders, members of the U.S. government to Africa to meet African leaders. I just want to say this, too, that when imperialism wages an assault, it's not always military. It could look like this. It could look like an NGO. It could look like putting the NBA in Africa so that you can give people opportunities to come into some money through the NBA. Like it could look like all of these efforts, right? That benefits the people, but it really tethers us more and more to U.S. imperialism. So the new council's role, the newly formed Advisory Council on African Diaspora, is responsible for reinforcing cultural, social, political, and economic ties between the U.S. and Africa, and promoting trade, investment, and educational exchanges between the United States and Africa, according to the press release. One can surmise that the Advisory Council will serve as the black faces of the U.S. domestic colony whenever it is necessary for the U.S. to gain influence among cultural and economic sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie. And even though this is an all-African committee, this council was created as a tool of U.S. imperialism to represent the interests of U.S., not Africa. Coco, you want to take up here?
Yeah, I can take off. U.S. multi-pronged strategy. We should not be fooled by the latest attempt of the U.S. to appear as trusted partner of Africa and African people. The advisory board is part of the U.S. multi-pronged strategy to intervene in and undermine Africa's self-determination. In June 2022, the White House released the fact sheet that announced their global infrastructure and investment plan. Listed among the strategies to gain economic footing in developing countries was the promise by the U.S. to deliver $25 million to support the economic empowerment of African women through the Uhuru Growth Fund IA. The United States is a domestic colony that established itself on the backs of African slaves from the wombs of African women and bathed in the blood of indigenous people. The fund, managed by Uhuru Investment Partners, is so crazy for the name. It's registered in Luxembourg with a colonizer as the chairperson of the investment committee. Despite claiming to raise over $200 million through the World Bank and other international government funding endeavors, their portfolio of investments only include 2 companies. It remains to be seen what, if any, impact this fund has made toward advancing the economic empowerment of African women. It is also no coincidence that the name of their fund includes Uhuru, the Swahili word for freedom, first made popular by the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, Mau Mau, and made internationally recognized by the African People's Socialist Party, APSP, that leads the Uhuru movement. Why so pessimistic? The United States is a domestic colony that established itself on the backs of enslaved Africans from the wombs of African women and bathed in the blood of indigenous people. African people have not had one moment of peace and prosperity in the United States, domestic colonies, since we were forcibly brought here. We survived brutal attacks and fought for every democratic right that the white colonizer has tried to keep from us. In the United States in 2023, African people were lynched by white vigilantes. We overpopulated prisons and have our children kidnapped by the state and are fighting against the attacks that guarantee our right to vote. And African migrants are treated like animals at every border, while the real Uhuru economic and political work of African People's Socialist Party is under attack by the U.S. government. The United States isn't interested in improving relationships with African people. The clearest example of that is the fact that the U.S. government under Joe Biden's Department of Justice has yet to drop the charges on the Hoover 3 and pay reparations to African people. Instead, the indictment against the Hoover 3 is still looming, and there is no White House strategy on the matter of reparations to African people. In fact, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, leader and founder of the APSP, faces 15 years in prison for the work he's done to put political and economic power in the hands of African people. It is through the work of our movement where a doula training program has developed and conducted, as well as African Women's Health Center that's being constructed in the most economically depressed sector of St. Louis, Missouri. These programs reflect our commitment and the will as African people to be free and self-determining, not constantly at the mercy of the colonizers, even when they come in blackface. Like always, U.S. imperialism would rather organize a committee filled to the brim with African petty bourgeoisie to advance its political interests in our homeland, while the neo-colonial puppets hand them our Africa on the platter. It's not pessimism. It's making an educated analysis based on the history and current status of the treatment of Africans by the United States government. There can't be a U.S.-Africa partnership because there are 54 different Africas. A partnership between Africa and the foreign nation will be impossible until Africa is united as one nation under the leadership of the African working class, who will own the means of production to improve the lives of all African people. Let's fight to close every gap that imperialism has wiggled its way through until it is won. Oh, Africa must be free. African workers of the world unite. Hooroo.
Thank you, comrade. So this article talks about a number of things, the U.S. strategy to keep us tethered to itself, right? Through all of these different strategies that they're employing, the UN, this advisory council. And clearly, like when there are African people who are doing things to actually take those tethers off, there's no support for that. You try to indict them, you assassinate them, you do all the things that show that they're that you have no interest in, helping to keep African women free from violence or helping to keep African people the economic development that we so desperately need. It's really a ploy and a strategy to keep us vested in the system in and of itself. So all of these things that I would say not just the United States puts out, NGOs are a part of that strategy. I want us to really remember, or maybe you don't remember because you weren't alive. I wasn't alive in many of these cases, but we can recall like stories or things that we might have read around the so-called like the Catholic Church and missionary missions on the continent of Africa and why they were there. And while you have the gun in one hand, you have these institutions that are there to help educate the people, help them get the skills and tools, because they were so concerned about the souls of these individuals. We also had people who were there to kind of help and navigate and do all these things that really didn't solve the problem, but allowed the masses to be managed through this process. And I would even imagine that the NGOs are not imagine, they are like a management facility. Like if they didn't have the NGOs there, then African people would be like, we gotta get it free, we gotta do this. And I would say also there's a challenge too, because through the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, when we were doing like development work on the continent of Africa, it's so the people there who are used to seeing development happen on the continent are used to the NGOism, are used to I'm going to deposit money, I'm going to hire this whole staff from your village, and we're going to do a project. And we did a video when we were in Sierra Leone, and one of the people who was a part of our project in Sierra Leone worked for Oxfam and some of these other NGOs, and was saying that they would just put up money, they would take a picture of a building, show the funders a picture of the building, but nothing would be happening at the building. Like it's just a thing that exists because it was created and nobody asked for it, but it was a thing that was prompted by the funder. And I think it's really important too to like really say that, this article also talks about like the African petty bourgeoisie as handing Africa over on a platter. And even the most radical of the African petty bourgeoisie, they might, these people who are on this committee they may be like, yeah, Africa needs to own its own manufacturing. And I think like one of the richest people in Africa, I forget his name, he's Africa, but he's one of the most richest men in the continent of Africa. He owns like some sort of means of production somewhere. And the conditions of African people still remain the same. We've seen Akon, go in and say he wants to create the Wakanda village. He didn't name it the Wakanda village because his idea was before the actual movie came out. And I'm sure he wasn't reading Black Panther, the comics, but he wanted to create a self-sufficient sort of village in Africa and was really petitioning to make this happen. And that, I don't know where that stands now, but a village self-sufficient, no, on the continent of on the one of the largest continents on the face of this planet does not make a solution, period. Like, so what we need to be, and what he would do, not to bust Akon out, is like negotiate with these so-called corrupt leaders on the continent of Africa to get his solar powering and things like that, slide in some bribes with somebody because this thing was getting funded somehow. And so yeah, like it's really a tether. And so back to my original point, like there's a nicer this is what NGOism, charity is like a nicer, cleaner imperialism, right? It's not the ones with the guns, not the one we blow up your hands and use force and chop off things and use fear. We do it through this process where we manage the people's expectation. And I think that that's the same that thing that happens in the United States with nonprofits that Coco touched on. When you I know exactly after the Mike Brown Jr. killing, a lot of the people who were in the streets leading resistance got hired. There was some money that was flooded into that community and nonprofits were formed. So you take the people out of the streets, people who were calling for an end to it all, and you give them employment and you give them a palatable path for how they can resist. And that path is set by the $1 million trust that you put into that organization. I wish somebody would give Anwar $1 million. I wish they would, child. Like it would be, y'all would, we would act out. Like there would be like no strings attached, man. Like it would be a lot. It would be, this
And
would
we
be.
still wouldn't even pay ourselves. That's the crazy part
I,
about it.
listen. I'll pay y'all, but we're gonna be doing, but we're gonna be doing this work out here. You're gonna see. So, like, I wish, you know what I mean? Like, but since my wishes ain't material, then you gotta organize for the resource that you need, right? Like, so, so the things that we need is really, really important to us. And how do we get that if we're not saying that NGOs work or we're not interested in the immediate? I'm interested in immediate results, right? But I'm interested in immediate results that can be scaled through our self-determination. Immediate result, like if you're hungry and somebody and the rice comes from the airplane and is dropped on the airport, and all you gotta do is walk up to get the bag, right? And you walk away. How then do you avoid not, needing the rice again or not learning how to, and I'm not saying learning because I know our people know how to grow some damn rice. Listen, we know how to grow a lot of things. But when you undercut the ability for people to make resources and mess up the land and the environment, you cause wars, people can't do the things they would normally do, you only leave the people with the desperation of this rice drop. I also want to say that I was, one of my entry points into this movement was really looking at, I saw a film, I don't know if it exists anymore, I think I saw it on YouTube, Life and Debt, DEBT. Explored, it was a whole it was another, it's a longer title, but explored World Trade World Trade Organization, explored the world, what was the other one? It was two things. It was the fund, and then there was the IMF, right? And WTO, and how these organizations undercut indigenous economics. And it's like, so that really helped me understand and answer the question already that I had, was how come African, and it was in Jamaica, Life and Debt in Jamaica or something like that, and explored like the local people saying, yeah, we grow pineapples here. But the exported, but the negotiated contract by the government says that we can allow foreign pineapples to come in at a cheaper price and flood the market than what is indigenously grown here. So what does that do to everybody who made money selling the sweetest, most amazing pineapple from the land where people are living? That pushes them out of the network, the business, right? And there are things like, that was one example, but there was like things like banana, um, a whole bunch of things. So the way that IMF, World Bank works is that they create these cycles of debt and deepen your debt in the country. I think Michael Manley was in that. He was the president of the prime minister of Jamaica in the early 80s, and he was seen as a progressive, not a revolutionary, but he was talking tough along with many other places in the Caribbean. And he was leaning toward He was leading toward like, self-determination, things like that, but he wasn't there yet, you know what I mean? But he was explaining like how, like, we were at a point where we could not afford this or that. I forget the specifics. And the only thing that we could do was reach out to the World Bank because they gave loans. And if we wanted to solve this problem in our country, because there was no other way for us to solve this problem, we had to accept their terms so that we can get this cash. So in the short view, we needed the cash. They didn't want to struggle. They didn't want to work through like Cuba did when they were cut off from oil and they had to depend on themselves. They opened up gardens everywhere and they still are doing these type of things. But Michael Mann was like, we had to solve this problem. We had to solve this problem. And then what that does is that impoverishes the entire, like in the short run, you get this influx of cash, but in the long run, you're indebted and the cash has to be paid back. And your GDP is depressed because now foreign goods are coming into your country, and the GDP is depressed because the things that you are able to export have minimized as well. So it's going to take you long as hell to pay this debt back, which has high interest rates and things like that. So it wasn't made to do that. And as a matter of fact, it was made to entrap you. Coco?
Well, I was looking for this reel that like my comment got like kind of a lot, but here we go. It was this professor talking about nonprofits and NGOs and talking about how in order to get the funding, like you were talking about Jamaica and how they had to like choose one or the other. They had to go ahead in order to sustain. They had to go ahead and call them to the World Bank. And that made me remember this video because she said by the time nonprofits, she's like, we all down for nonprofits. I think that's like the kind of like the new hustle almost. But in order, if you want to do good work, but the way you have to water down your vision or water down your program or whatever you want to do in order to fit the parameters of what you need to do in order to get that grant or that loan or that financing, is you done went off the rails. By the time you done all right, we got to change this in order to fit this grant. We got to do this in order to fit this grant, and you have to like pretty much surrender, like you said, surrender to the terms of the colonizer in order to get the funds that you need to sustain. I was looking for the video. I can't find it.
Okay, Uhuru Comrade, thank you so much. I was looking at some of the comments in the chat, and Masamala was adding some points about Manly, and I also put a link in the chat about the documentary I was referring to, Life in Debt, and it looks like it's still up somewhere. I think it's on Amazon according to one of the search results. I think people should dig into that. But I mean, if you really want to understand the World Bank and IMF, then and have a deeper understanding about that, like you should definitely watch this film. Like I thought it radicalized me in a kind of way. I was just like, yeah, that's why we can't get nothing, right? my jazz sound, that's why we can't make ourselves do nothing. And then I heard the state and colonialism from the party. I was like, yes, this is how we get out of this mess right here, because it's crazy. Because what Life and Debt only does is tells me what exists, and I'm just like, well, then what do we do about it? what then do we do about this thing? NGOs, the economic starvation of our people, the all of the things. What then do we do? And African International said, well, we got to get control of our resources. We got to make a revolution. We got to overturn our relationship to colonialism, which is hard to do. It's not simple. I'm saying it simply, but it's not. But we have to get people to that point where you have to, the head's going to be up, and people should know that at the point in society where we about to fight, like you could feel the tension in the air. Things got so tough, like like we gotta get out of this, man. They'll introduce an NGO, they'll introduce a solution, they'll do something to stop the people from resisting and rising up. They'll put a black president in your face. They'll put a black woman or woman of color in your face. They'll do the thing, right? And even in this time where we have in the United States a Trump, But we also had a Reagan, I was little when Reagan was president. I just remember Reagan being on the thing. He was a president for like 2 terms, so I remember him. But you have a Reagan who was awful, and you have other presidents throughout we also, but outside of the presidents, the local government, we got the governors, the mayors, the city council, all of these things that impact the level of life and things that we are able to enjoy. And we can't really enjoy nothing because we always on the stressor. We know something's coming because it ain't gonna be like this forever. So you always got your head on the swivel. You got to prepare yourself because it's just always going to be something else because colonialism hasn't been destroyed. So when somebody says, "Yeah, get a job at this NGO," you should get it, but you should also be organizing with a real organization. You should also be giving your time and your effort with a real organization that actually wants to not exist because this is horrible. And I say that as somebody who's not living as horrible as maybe somebody else might be living, but I also recognize that I hate this so much in the fiber of my being. I do not want my daughter to live in a world that, she's big, but like I don't want my daughter, and if she has grandkids or my nieces and my nephews, I don't want any of them to experience this frustration, like this feeling of hopelessness, right? That can come with being an African person trapped under colonialism. And what do we do? Because they keep throwing out these things, we have to be smart. We have to encourage discussion around this. We can't allow for an article that talks about and putting one of the best Black actresses on an advisory committee for US imperialism, and then we got people snapping their hands up. We can't accept that they could pop a Uhuru Growth Fund that don't do nothing and got nothing in portfolio. And because they use the Uhuru language of the Mau Mau, who resisted imperialism, British colonialism, they put that in our face to trick us. And if you don't scratch the surface, just lightly, if you don't scratch the surface, then what you can be doing is like just accepting that this is the thing. But I looked into that thing. I was like, let me track. I was in a rabbit hole for days. I said, let me look at the Uhuru Growth Fund number 2. That's what it's named. And I found them and I was like, who's this board? And this board was based in Luxembourg, Germany. And the funder was like this filthy white man. And they had this board of white people. And then I did a Google Earth to the offices in Nigeria and Ghana. And I saw who worked there. And I was just like, there were Africans who were working there, but like the office was like, this is a $200 million fund. The offices in Ghana and Nigeria were like in the sticks, right? Google Earth that thing. And then the portfolio that they had was a supermarket, and it was unclear on where the supermarket was and how this empowered African women and in what way. 2 things. And you also have to see who funded this thing. Like you had the IMF, I think World Bank funded it, which is problematic, of course, because they be undercutting, so like if you're like me and you just like, I don't trust that, even if it looks good, I'm like, if you just see who the actors and players are, then you could just make an assumption and a determination. And NGOs are more difficult than the US government saying they're going to do a growth fund because they're like, Coco said, there are people who actually want to do good working in this organization. There are people who believe in the mission. And it's hard to like suss out like, and they do stuff. They do things like free the whales and ride a whale across the Atlantic Ocean like Greenpeace does. They'll create a school somewhere in some place like Oprah does and educate all these girls to be African petty bourgeoisie. Like they'll do a thing that can be evidenced as a way to solve a problem, an immediate problem. And those things are welcomed by the community, but they also do so much to mask over the real contradiction, which is not the fact that we don't know how to have schools, which is not the fact that if we didn't mess up the environment, the whales will be able to be saving themselves. You know what I mean? And like if colonialism wasn't exploiting and oppressing the people, there wouldn't need to be people in the jungles of Rwanda, fighting, because there are other ways that we can, create wealth. And in every instance that I just said about the problem and how they are solving them, colonialism caused it, parasitism caused the issue. So how do we solve that? NGOs might be helpful to solve immediate stuff, but like we have to dig deeper. We have to organize ourselves. We also have to be desperate, I think, as people, because it's like, do we want to continue this? Is this okay for us? And we got to be organizing ourselves. We have to recognize also the time that we in right now. I'm not a scary person. I think that what's happening in my lifetime is the first time I've ever seen anything like this or even noticed anything like this. So it's a little different in the United States and Trump and all the speedy sorts of things that is happening right now around us. The political violence, there's always been political violence, but political violence, we have the policies, the all out assault like on what they deem as democracy. And what happens, I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna pivot a little bit. What happens when you are a gooder what person, and you are feel like your democracy is being assaulted, and you forget that what you had before that was also shit. So you're fighting just to get back to what you had before that, which was also shit. You're not fighting to get free. You're fighting not to be as assaulted as you are now. So we got to keep the long range objectives in our head all the time. That no matter who is president, governor, senator, congressman, mayor, county representative, things like that, the goal is to get free. And if they are not about that, then they're not somebody that we should support or that we should be okay with, because they're a lesser of three or two evils. And the same for the NGOs, right? Like if we look at the NGOs and they're like, okay, we gotta, I'll be down, I'll be down with an NGO that was like arming African women and providing African self-determination, like to prevent themselves from being raped and actually like give them an infrastructure, like to like defend ourselves, right? I'll be down with that stuff, but it wouldn't be an NGO because they don't do that type of thing. They wouldn't get funding for that. They wouldn't give funding for giving Black women guns because those guns could then be turned on them, right? Like they wouldn't give funding for like that sort of thing. But we NGOs like do this work of putting a band-aid on really deep and profound issues. And it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work for all the reasons that we've talked about this evening. And I guess the final point I want to say is that, let's get free. And if freedom is not in the vision of the NGO, if freedom is not in the vision, like a specific freedom, like it sometimes is the vision of like some radical leftists. So their vision of freedom might be like, let's have more social services under colonialism. I don't know. Like if free means the workers have power, African people have control of our resources, and are able to determine what those resources will be used toward. And it's the African working class, sorry, not the African people, because we know what the petty bourgeoisie would do with those resources. The African working class has control of our resources, and we are able to solve the problems that have been perpetuated by colonialism. That's my vision of freedom, and that's the vision of freedom of the African People Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. And like if you don't align with any of that, scratch the surface. Scratch the surface, even if it sounds good. Like even especially if it sounds too good. So I'm gonna start to roll it out, but I'm gonna open it up to see if there's any other questions before I go into the last announcements and or comments or feedback or whatever you got, you know. I have a prompt too. Maybe that'll help for anybody who wants to feel froggy. Um, but if you don't need a prompt, then feel free to jump in. Okay. The prompt is, from your own experience, how have NGO or nonprofit programs impacted the lives of African and colonized women? And did they open change or did they reinforce dependency? Ah, I was trying not to, I should have did this prompt before I started going on my tirade because you already know the answer to that. But do you have your own experience of being in the nonprofit world or NGO world? Any examples that you want to share? All right. And feel free to drop them in the chat. Sometimes it's okay.
Woo-hoo.
Woo, comrade.
Hey, my bad. I was definitely trying to pay attention and would have participated more, but I had a lot going on here as always. But I would say from my own experience, just seeing how it's weakened the movement. So somebody might have mentioned this beforehand, but specifically when we look at the original Black Panther Party. So in the beginning, when they were doing, the survival programs, pending revolution, a lot of that was, independent, and then, people that may have been in the community that donated, churches, businesses. But the more they started pushing the survival programs, the more they started getting nonprofit money and grant money. And we've seen that unintentionally, I will say it was unintentionally, that a lot of their focus became those programs. But in working to push those programs, it took away from a great degree to armed resistance. But then also, it's like when you have money from these people, when you have these programs, it's like now you're dependent on, the people that are supplying. So the more radical your message is, the more militant your message is, the less, we'll see, struggle. Or so, yeah, I would just say from looking at the weakening of the movement, and what we saw from that is just that became the model. So whereas everybody was pushing the line, after that, everybody is now, and I think this was mentioned a little bit earlier, within the nonprofit sector. And Robert Allen talked about it in Black Awakening in Capitalist America. That was the push. And so, yeah, like it's definitely weakened the movement. And, we're seeing a lot of people, I think Massimela made the point, mistaking real movement for, nonprofit work. Not to say that, we don't need some of the programs that are, established because of colonialism, but understanding that, they're not the overall solution. But a lot of times people think that it is. And I mean, it's hard to compete when somebody else mentioned this, when, like they got the money, and people need the program. So people going to be out there, if they giving away shoes, they giving away backpacks. But that just goes to the point of why we need to, double down on our efforts to be more independent and, really push self-determination. But yeah.
Thank you, comrade. Comrade Amina? If you're speaking, you're on mute. Okay, here we go.
Okay, back. Uhuru. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're on point. You did an incredible analysis. That is what's happening with NGOs and them proffering that they are helping us African women wherever we are in the world. And in my experience, when you have visionary leaders that have an ideological foundation at the helm or running those organizations where you're actually getting results, they then figure out ways, just like they have with our visionary leaders, Pan-Africanist leaders. They find out ways to shut you down, and in fact, depending on what issues you're working on with African people, it can even put your life at risk. There have been, nonprofit leaders in this DC area who, with their multi-million-dollar life insurance policies that were held by the nonprofit, had suspicious endings. So it's not a joke. They're very serious, and they'll keep doing it. And we need to determine for ourselves, by ourselves, what we need.
I'm ready for like a collective conversation and problem solving around it. It's like I think because we've named the problem, right?
Yeah.
And it might need to be a think tank, more than a think tank, but like a think then action tank about how do we solve that problem? Like, because they have all the money, but we need to solve this problem and we need to get free. And if we don't have all those resources, then how do we create the community or the society or the network that will allow us to forward a movement without having to worry about the treacherous life that we are confronted by. So if we don't get money from this job, then we lose everything, right? So then how do we solve those problems so that we can allow for a real sustained, ongoing body of people who believe in this thing to continue to work toward that? And that's a real like fundamental question and issue that we all have to think through. Coco?
Uhuru, you're not what's been said so far, and really, to expand on that, shout out to Mecca for recommending At the Dark End of the Street, because I'm into this book. I'm in this book, and it's really seeing how women organize. We women have always been the organizer, but to see how women go in and like it's very inspirational to me because um it was very inspirational to me because we we didn't have the option to do grants and stuff like that. It was a lot of petty bourgeoisie people that held the purse strings and everything, but it was really the working class people who were putting up their money, sharing, writing articles, sharing information, doing writing campaigns. It was working class people doing the work. And I feel like now people don't want to do the work because they don't see it as an obvious problem, but we have not developed from reconstruction. I mean, really, and it's just reverting back. So we have to get back into these streets. We have to actually like each one teach one. We have to get to a place where we are not competing for funds as well, because that's another thing I see is like it's one grant, but it's 60 nonprofits trying to get the one grant, where we need to be we need self-determination. We need to be self-funded. We need to people were pinching off dollars and coins in order to raise money for attorney fees for some of these women that are discussed in the book. We do have to get like we have to make it real for people. I think it's so much of the colonizer society is a lot of glitz and glamour and lux. Like we have to stop seeing self-care as putting on $100 face mask and taking a $100 bath in your 1,500 square feet bathroom or something, and it really has to be self-care is getting free. I want to be free. I don't care about a face mask. I don't care about getting my nails done because I want to be free. Uhuru.
Bars. I think that was like give like well it was a album, Get Free or Die Trying. um Comrades, thank you so much for those last thoughts and just all of your expertise and feedback. And even if you didn't say anything, I really appreciate being a part of this conversation. Um, and share after it's posted on the socials, and there's some links that we also shared in the chat too that have at it, take a read and reference some of those. So we have another PE that's going to be in October. I forget the date. I gotta go put back up. But we have one other PE that we're planning as a part of the RNDP study in October. And then we're going to take a break. This is a lot sometimes, but like then we're gonna take a break and come back with a whole slew of new topics that we can take over, that we can collaborate with Impedum on. But the October one is gonna be policing prisons and the colonial war on African women. And I just want to say that there is no separate war on African women that's not happening to our entire African people, but we will inch out like what specific things are what specially oppression that African women face that maybe not the rest of the population faces. So we're going to look at Black women and state violence and political prisoners and resistance. And a lot of not a lot of political prisoners are women, but we have definitely African political prisoners and political refugees who have defended African liberation. And that's going to be in October. Final announcements are we're going to have a breakdown and we're going to explore some of the things some of the concepts that we talked about today. And the breakdown is going to be on October 5th. It is called The Rent is Due: African Women, Colonialism, and the Real Cost of Sex Work. What happens when survival is mistaken for liberation? In this episode, we'll examine the colonial roots of sex work and expose how poverty, displacement, and gendered violence push African women into the so-called hustle of the sex trade. So we look forward to that discussion. And then on September 20th, in addition to the Impedum Convention, we are going to be having the One Africa, One Nation Farmers Market right alongside the Impedum Convention on that Saturday. And so definitely come through if you are in St. Louis. And if you're at the Impedum Convention, definitely like vend with our partners who are there and take some of their wares. And we're going to have some produce. So you'll get some free produce from us too and some of our donors to the market. To definitely celebrate these vendors who have been with us the whole season and sticking with us as we continue to grow and build this market. On October 12th, we will have the Harriet Daughters Book Club, and we're going to be discussing gender, nation, and class. It will analyze and connect the historical relevance to the modern day anti-colonial movements. Itimad Muhanna examines the decline of the Palestinian leftist movement during the first Intifada in 87 to 93 and the impact of the rise of Hamas on Palestinian gender norms. That's really interesting. And then, of course, we still are doing our Arrest CPS campaign, putting up posters around our cities. The main cities are Washington, D.C., San Diego, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and Brooklyn, New York. But we also have posters going up in other cities as well. So check in, and if you see them, definitely take a picture and let us know that you've seen them. As always, we call on African women to join the African National Women's Organization. We are the only ones that can save ourselves. African women are half of the African population. If we are not involved in organizing and revolutionary work, then how then can we hope to get our people free? So join this incredible organization and be a part of the solution that we were just talking about today. So definitely go to anwaruhuru.org/join to register your interest by filling out an application and paying dues, which is also a self-determined self-investment in the revolutionary capacity of African women. And, be a part of this team. I know that there are some new members here that we haven't had local meetings yet, but that's coming soon. There's a lot of stuff that's happening right now, but definitely we're going to be putting that out very soon as to that strategy. But definitely join the African National Women's Organization. And finally, I want to thank you once again. Don't remember that you can still donate. You can still buy from our store. You can still buy decolonage. You can do all those things to support us. But also thank you for being a part of this process and this webinar and showing interest and sharing and liking and doing all the things that help keep the analysis going. So appreciate you so much, comrades. And with that, I'll see you next month for October's Harriet's Daughters RNDP collaboration. Uhuru. I got a picture. Thank y'all. Uhuru. I just gotta end.